We ran a survey with 115 Christian participants. Of those participants, some of them were Christians who had been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and the rest of the participants were sort of our control group, also Christian, but individuals who did not have OCD. Now, we took all of those individuals and we asked them this question. We said, in the last 3 months, how often have you tried to force yourself to feel spiritual realities like faith, love, compassion, or a desire for God? You will be surprised at the results, but a full 52% of participants with OCD said always or often. Half of the Christians with OCD that we surveyed are often or always trying to force themselves to feel certain spiritual realities. This is in contrast to our control group with only 11% of participants without OCD feeling the same thing. So if you are a Christian that has been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, or if you strongly suspect that you have some of those obsessive tendencies, you need to know about this. You need to know that there could be very unique mental patterns that are hijacking a normal biblical emotional relationship with God. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. If you've been exposed to OCD world for any length of time, you know that there are a number of different kinds of obsessions and different kinds of compulsions. And it's almost like OCD has this entire library for you to select from, and whatever sort of logical fallacy your brain finds easiest to accept, that's the kind of obsession or compulsion that you will connect with. And it'll just start operating in the background of your mind without you even thinking about it. That's part of what makes OCD so tricky. In this video in particular, I want to talk about two kinds of compulsions that converge together in this topic about trying to force spiritual feelings. And that is the checking compulsions and the just right compulsions. These are actually very common in the world of OCD. And when I say a checking compulsion, what we're talking about is a mode of thinking in which your brain lacks complete certainty. And so in order to try to gain closure about an issue, you feel the need to go back and check and check and check again. I think the stereotypical example of this is somebody who keeps going back home to check to see if they turned the stove off or they turned the oven off or something like that. So this is like a chronic need to check in order to make sure. Unfortunately, because of the nature and the structuring of the OCD brain, this is not about you or your Christian values. This is very much a biological aspect of the OCD brain. The OCD brain lacks the ability to sense and feel closure about an issue the way normal, healthy brains do. And so you can check something hundreds of times. And we have stories from the OCD recovery community of people who are going back to check things dozens of times, people who are becoming late for work, losing their jobs because every single day they're having to go and check things. And so checking compulsions can be a very disturbing part of life because of how it can interrupt the normal flow of functionality. When it comes to a person that has religious OCD, the checking compulsions can come in a couple of different forms, but specifically the one I want to talk about in this video is checking our emotions. Now, I've seen a lot of people with scrupulosity, religious OCD, that will check to make sure that they feel a sense of love for God like they should, or like they believe that they should. And I think part of what feeds this compulsion is a faulty idea that our emotions for God should be at a certain high standard all the time. And there isn't really a forgiving or realistic sense that, like any other human any other human relationship, I should say, the emotions will come and go. They will ebb and flow naturally. I mean, when you're really, really exhausted because of a long day at work, you're hardly going to come home and have this flight of ecstatic religious emotion when you read your Bible. You're going to be tired and you're going to read something because you know that it feeds your soul, but you're probably not going to muster up the same emotion that you would if you were on a spiritual retreat, right? So emotions, they are really not the kind of thing that is always super stable. But the person that has these checking compulsions, checking to look for, do I feel love for God like I should? Do I feel devotion for God like I should? tends to have a more rigid view of what those emotions should look like on an ongoing basis. Another variation of this is checking to make sure that you're sorry enough for your sins. And I have literally had some clients talk to me about their confession compulsion routines that they go through. And part of what can make the confession of sin so difficult for them is that they feel this need to muster up a real sense of shame and sorrow and sadness. And I remember one young lady told me that it was so important for her to really show God that she was sorry. And, she had read Bible passages about, when you sin of like mourning and weeping and putting on sackcloth and ashes. And she understood like, okay, we're not literally supposed to put on sackcloth and ashes, but at the very least, I'm supposed to really, really feel the depth of sorriness for my sins if God is going to forgive me, if my confession is going to be acceptable to God. And she said, I try to make myself cry when I confess sins, but sometimes I can't, and then I feel really bad about that. And so she ended up sharing with me how confessing one single sin could take her 1 to 2 hours. And so she was starting to avoid doing it because of how time consuming and laborious it was and how emotionally draining it was to really try to make herself feel that emotion. And so she was checking for that. And her prayer was either validated or invalidated by having the depth of emotion that she was looking for. Another one that is kind of tricky as well, and you might not think about it in terms of emotions, but I'm just going to group it in the same category anyways. Lots of people with scrupulosity are checking to see if they can feel their faith or to feel that their faith is sufficient. And this is really tricky because we don't think of faith as an emotion, but it's almost like these, the subset of individuals with this particular obsession and compulsion are checking to see, do I really feel a sense of bedrock groundedness and confidence and sureness? Do I really feel my faith? And this point, especially for a person with OCD, can be really disruptive. I mentioned a moment ago about the biological nature of the OCD brain, how it is more difficult for our brains to feel a sense of closure. That does not mean the same thing as doubt, as in that pernicious, rebellious, I want to disbelieve kind of doubt. It's a different kind of doubt. The doubt that a person with OCD experiences is a biological deficit in being able to feel the emotional and psychological sense of closure. So you could have researched some apologetic point and researched it to death. You've read every single argument and you really do feel convinced about it, and you are in every way committed to whatever it is that you're studying. You're committed to following that as a disciple of Jesus Christ. But there's always like this lingering sense of, yeah, but how do I know? Have I really covered all the ground? What if there's something else that I haven't answered? How do I know? How do I know? And that feeling can be really disturbing because it feels like doubt. It feels like a lack of closure. And so some people, when they get in that place, they may feel like they don't have enough faith. And so they'll go back and check. Do I feel confidence in God? Do I feel assurance? Do I feel that I know the right answers to this? And again, this is a checking compulsion. And it's something that we have to be aware of because it's not what God was asking for. Piggybacking off this idea of the checking compulsions, where you're going and you're checking and checking again into your own inner self, is the just right compulsions. This is very much related, very similar, but it's on a different level because with the just right compulsions, we're specifically talking about an internal standard that you've created for some aspect of your selfhood. And in these situations of the religious, emotional obsessions and compulsions, there's a standard that we set up that for my emotion to be just right, for it to be done well, for it to be at par for what God expects from me, the emotional state should be like this. And so we tend to set a really high bar, and often a very unrealistically high bar. But let's unpack this a little bit, because when you say just right, what are we meaning? Again, going to some of the other stereotypical OCD pictures you may have seen out there, maybe a just right obsession or compulsion in another domain not related to religion would be maybe somebody who has to have like perfect symmetry and order in the way that they arrange things. And if they arrange their pens just right at just the right angle, or if they sort their clothes with, color coordination or something, it kind of and I'm saying this because, guys, I have experienced OCD. I have walked the OCD road. I know what this is like. And yes, I have had some symmetry OCD. It wasn't my most major theme, but it's been there. And when I can tell you firsthand that when things are arranged the way that I feel like they should, according to my own internal standard of just right, and things are just right in my house and in my closet and so on and so forth, there is a feeling that sort of washes over you of a security, of like everything is just right now. I can rest. And it's a weird feeling. If you've experienced this, then drop me a comment below if you know the feeling when everything is put just right. Unfortunately, to achieve that just rightness involves a whole lot of work. And then the beauty of it lasts very briefly, because then something is out of place again. I'm talking specifically to the symmetry OCD. When we bring that just right standard to religious OCD, what's happening here is that we create a standard of, I think this is how joyful a Christian should be, and so I'm going to strain every effort to be as joyful as Sister Jane in the pew next to me, who is always rejoicing and looks like the most joyful Christian I've ever seen. I know that the fruit of the Spirit is joy, so I'm supposed to have joy, therefore I need to have joy like Sister Jane. Let me work harder at having joy. And so we try to achieve that emotional state because that's what just right looks like. And if we don't have that, then there's a sense of a sense of missing out on something that could be critically dangerous to us. So that brings an element of insecurity and anxiety. So we want to work harder. We want to achieve that state of just right, because as long as we're not in that state of just rightness, then there's a sense of danger upon us. You could apply this idea to any of the emotional realities of your spiritual life, whether that's joy, peace, rest, a desire for God, feeling like you are excited to open up the Bible and read about God versus feeling kind of apathetic or tired. There's so many domains of your emotional life that we could apply this to, but in any of them, what we're looking at is a specific standard of perfection that you have created, because the Bible doesn't go into great depth as to, okay, come on, what does joy mean? It's so different from one person to another, how joy is expressed, how joy feels, how it's experienced. However, we create this internal standard and nothing but perfection will do. And so we're constantly trying to conjure up the emotions that we need. This is a side note, but this can be particularly difficult for individuals who are in spiritual burnout. I have a whole nother video about spiritual burnout, which I will try to link as well. But if you have spiritual burnout, chances are you're going to be flatlining emotionally. You're not going to be feeling a whole lot of anything except apathy or angst. But then if you get in that state of burnout and you have all of these just right compulsions where you're trying to force the right emotions, can you see what a toxic combination that's going to be? You don't have the energy, you don't have the brain power to have any emotions right now if you're burned out, but you're trying to force that into being. And I just want to give you guys a Bible passage that I think can be helpful in this regard. This is a foreshadowing of the new covenant as we read about it in Ezekiel 36, verses 25 through 27. And as I read this passage, you're probably familiar with it already, but I want you to just notice how many times God is referring to himself when he says, I will do this. Just notice how many times God says I. And this is in contrast to our desire to do everything and to muster up everything that we think needs to be there. Listen to what God says. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. I will cleanse you from all your filthiness and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will keep my judgments and do them. Do you see how thorough God is in his work under the new covenant of living in us and cleansing us and putting a new heart and putting his spirit in us? Everything here is describing God's work in our lives. There's nothing here that says, oh, but make sure you work really hard to love me the way you're supposed to love me and get all the right emotions in there. In fact, This reference to, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. The heart and the spirit are intrinsically linked to my emotions. And so for God to promise me that he's going to give me a new heart, that is an amazing promise, because God knows I can't fix my emotions. If I feel apathetic, or if I feel like I don't really have so much desire for God, and I'm like, I would like to desire you, God, but I don't, I'm just being honest, who's going to fix that? I can't manufacture those feelings, because to have love for the divine is a miracle. In my own sinful nature, it is impossible for a sinful human to produce love for the divine. Like it doesn't work for us to try to do that. That's why the new covenant is so important for us to understand, because it has to be God. It's not just God doing this legal transaction of justification and, yep, I forgive you. No, it's him living out in every part of my life, because I can't do it. And so I just really want to encourage you with that thought, that if you are the type of person, and if you have OCD, there's like a 52% chance that this is you that I'm talking to. If you're the kind of person that is constantly trying to force the right emotions, you're checking your emotions to see if they're correct, and then you're trying to force them to that just right standard. If that's you, please, let's remember that it's Jesus who puts a new heart within us. It's not you manufacturing it. That's a shift away from self-dependence towards God dependence. If you're not yet convinced that it's okay for you to stop trying to muster up all the right spiritual emotions, let me share 2 more Bible passages with you before we finish for today. The first one is Romans 5:5. Now hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. You are not the one meant to manufacture love. The love of God is poured out into your heart. Your job is to be a receptacle that receives that love and channels it to others and experiences it for yourself. So love for God it's not a possibility for you to even manufacture it, only to receive it. The other passage I want to share with you is Galatians 5:22 and 23, which, as you know, is a list of the fruits of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. So here we see this list of the fruits of the Spirit, or the fruit of the Spirit, and notice that it's called the fruit of the Spirit, and it mentions a number of different things that we would consider emotions towards God, or spiritual emotions. And so for it to be a fruit of the Spirit means that the Spirit is planted in the soil of our hearts, and then it grows through the Spirit's power. Again, reinforcing the idea that this is not something that I manufacture, but rather something that I allow the Spirit to do in my life. And I trust him to do that and allow him to work. So bottom line, if you're trying to force your emotions, it means that you're looking at yourself, and in some form or fashion, you're depending on yourself to produce that. And I just want to remind you, when it comes to true love and desire and joy for God, you could look at yourself and analyze yourself for 1,000 years. You could spend every day for 1,000 years introspecting in on yourself and whipping and flogging and squeezing yourself to try to muster up all these emotions. You could do that for 1,000 years, guys, and it would not be as effective as one day of truly beholding the glory of the Lord. And so if there's anything that we can do to turn our focus away from ourselves and turn our eyes upon Jesus, one glimpse of the beauty of his character will do far more for us than all of the morbid introspections that OCD tries to get us addicted to. So that's my encouragement for you today. If you try to muster up all the right emotions, we've got to stop doing that. We've got to bring that to Jesus and say, look, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I bring to you, Lord. You have to fix it, because I can't. I can't obsess about this anymore. I can't stay introspecting on myself and all of my problems. I can't follow out all of these compulsions. God, please, will you fix this in me? And then we have to walk away and trust that he's going to fix it. When you do that, here's my warning to you. Just being realistic with you, because I've walked this road before, and I've walked this road with many other people who are recovering. When you try to walk away from that, your OCD is going to scream at you. And it has a really loud and scary scream when OCD is trying to get your attention. And your OCD is going to tell you something to this effect. It's going to say, hey, if you ignore this, if you ignore the thought that your feelings are not quite correct, you are being a spiritually negligent Christian. You might not even be a Christian at all. And your OCD is going to get really manipulative with you, and it's going to throw out a whole bunch of lies and fake news at you. But we have to ignore that. And just, I say that just so that you know it's part of the evil game plan of OCD. That's just what OCD is going to do. But I want to encourage you that, look, the longer that we engage with the just right compulsions, the checking compulsions, which are all, not only are they feeding into the neurotic patterns of OCD, but they're also training us in the school of legalism. I mean, it's incredible how OCD can make us so legalistic, and God is so patient with us. God is so tender and so merciful because he knows it's our brains doing it to us and that we're not trying to be legalistic, and God understands that. But I'm telling you, the more that we listen to those thoughts, we are training in the school of legalism, and we don't want that. And so your OCD is going to tell you, you are being negligent if you don't try to fix your emotions and make the emotions what you think they're supposed to be. But I want to be one voice telling you, it's actually the opposite. When you ignore that bid for attention from your OCD, and when you choose to turn it over into the hands of Jesus, that's when we've enrolled in the school of God dependence rather than self-dependence. And that is the healthiest thing that you can do. It's not going to feel good for a little while as you're learning and growing in that. So don't expect it to feel good. It's not going to give you a sense of relief. But the longer that you do that, the healthier your relationship with Jesus is going to become. And that is my greatest wish for you as you walk the road to recovery. So thanks for joining this video. If it's helpful for you, I invite you to subscribe or share with somebody else that you think might need to hear this message. And otherwise, I'll see you back for a future video.